The piece of paper my son slid across the kitchen table felt unnaturally heavy, as if the bold red letters across the top possessed their own physical weight. It bore the official seal of the United States Department of the Treasury right next to the recognizable blue logo of the Social Security Administration. My son David sat across from me, his hands folded neatly over his expensive leather portfolio, his face arranged into a mask of deep, practiced concern. He spoke in that slow, soothing tone usually reserved for frightened children or confused patients, explaining that my Social Security benefits had been frozen indefinitely due to a massive identity theft compromise. He pointed to a paragraph stating that all my connected bank accounts were at risk of federal seizure pending a fraud investigation. He told me I had only a few days to sign a representative payee designation and an emergency power of attorney, allowing him to reroute my remaining assets into a secure trust he managed just to keep the government from taking everything I owned. I held the paper in my hands, feeling a cold, hollow space opening up in my chest. The letter looked flawless. The bureaucratic language was dense and intimidating, but as my eyes tracked down to the very bottom of the printed page, past the signature of the supposed federal inspector, I noticed a tiny gray string of text automatically generated by the printer. It was an email routing header, and buried within that string of characters was a domain name I recognized. It wasn't a .gov address, it was the name of a private LLC. Before we go any further, I want to ask you a quick question. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from today and tell me, have you ever looked across a table at someone you love with your whole heart, only to realize in a single, terrifying instant that you didn't know them at all? I didn't say a word. I didn't gasp. I just stared at that line of text, while David continued to talk about how he was going to protect me completely, unaware that his own arrogance had just handed me the key to his destruction. My name is Arthur Mitchell. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life I have called the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Grand Rapids, Michigan my home. If you passed me in the hardware store or saw me walking my golden retriever through the neighborhood, you would probably just see an average retiree. You wouldn't know that for 38 years, I worked as a Senior Network Security Auditor for one of the largest regional healthcare systems in the Midwest. My entire professional life was dedicated to finding the ghost in the machine. I tracked digital footprints, audited server logs, and hunted down anomalies that hackers and internal thieves tried to hide in plain sight. I made a living by noticing the small things that other people ignored. I retired 3 years ago to spend more time with my wife, Elaine. We have been married for 42 years. Elaine is the kind of woman who can make a house feel like a home just by walking into it, but over the last 2 years she has been battling severe rheumatoid arthritis. Some days are good, but other days, the pain in her joints makes it difficult for her to even hold a coffee cup. Because of her health, I naturally took on the role of managing our household entirely. We aren't millionaires, but we have a comfortable, well-protected retirement fund, in a house that has been fully paid off for a decade, and most importantly, a small, beautiful cabin sitting on the shores of a lake up near Traverse City. That cabin is my heart. I built it with my own 2 hands alongside my father, back when I was a young man. I drove every nail, sanded every floorboard, and stacked the fieldstone for the fireplace. When David was a little boy, that cabin was his entire world. I taught him how to fish off the wooden dock. I taught him how to skip stones across the water as the sun went down. The cabin wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was the physical manifestation of our family's history, intended to be passed down so that one day David could sit on that same porch with his own children. It represented the legacy I had spent a lifetime building. I wanted to ensure that no matter what happened in the world, Elaine and I would have our sanctuary and our son would have a foundation to stand on when we were gone. I loved my son, I trusted him, but over the last year a quiet, unsettling distance had begun to grow between us, a shift in the wind that I couldn't initially explain. David was 38, working as a wealth management advisor and insurance broker for a mid-sized firm in Chicago, though he lived relatively close to us in a sprawling, newly built subdivision. 3 years ago he married Chloe, a high-end residential real estate agent, who always seemed to vibrate with a restless, calculating energy. On the surface, they were the picture of modern success. They drove leased European luxury SUVs, wore designer clothes, and took vacations to resorts that cost more for a weekend than my first car. But my years in security audits taught me that the surface rarely tells the whole story. I started noticing small, persistent warning signs. When David and Chloe came over for Sunday dinners, Chloe would often pace around our living room, her eyes darting to the crown, molding the hardwood floors and the size of the lot, muttering things about market value and property comps, as if she were mentally staging our home for an open house. I brushed it off as an occupational habit. Then came the questions. David started asking very specific, pointed questions about our estate planning. He wanted to know where the original physical deed to the Traverse City cabin was kept. He asked about the exact balance of my retirement accounts, data framing it as professional concern. "Just looking out for you and Mom," he would say, flashing that polished salesman's smile. "Inflation is eating into savings right now, Dad. You need someone actively managing your portfolio." I politely declined, telling him I was perfectly comfortable with my conservative index funds and my pension. The tension escalated slightly when Elaine's arthritis worsened. David began hovering over our mail. Once I walked into the kitchen and caught him holding my property tax statement, up to the light, his eyes scanning the assessed value, before he hastily dropped it back onto the counter. He started suggesting with increasing frequency that the upkeep of 2 properties was simply too much for a man my age, especially with a sick wife. He implied that my memory was slipping. Pointing out minor things like a misplaced set of keys or a forgotten appointment was evidence that I was becoming overwhelmed. "You're tired, Dad," he said to me one afternoon, his hand resting heavy on my shoulder. "You don't have to carry all this weight. Let me take the burden off you. Let me handle the heavy lifting." It sounded like love. It sounded like a son stepping up to care for his aging parents. But there was something in his eyes, a tight, hungry gleam that didn't match the warmth of his words. His body language was rigid. When I told him I had everything under control, his jaw clenched, and for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine cold irritation. And then came the morning he slid the Treasury Department letter across my kitchen table. As I sat there staring at the printed email, routing header at the very bottom of the page, my mind shifted effortlessly back into the analytical mode I had lived in for almost 4 decades. David had presented the document as a physical letter he had received on my behalf because he was listed as my emergency contact. But he had made a fatal error. He hadn't just printed a PDF, he had printed an email thread directly from his own email, client likely after converting a fake document. And in his rush, he hadn't unchecked the box that prints the metadata at the footer of the page. The line of text read, X originating IP 192.168.11, followed by routed via SMTP, admin@cloaholdings.llc.net. I knew exactly what that meant. The supposedly official federal notice hadn't come from a government server in Washington, D.C. It had been generated and routed through a private server domain, registered to my daughter-in-law's real estate holding company. I looked up at my son. He was still talking, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, explaining how a team of hackers in Eastern Europe had likely compromised my social security number during a recent hospital visit with Elaine. He pushed a pen toward me, tapping the signature line on the power of attorney form. "Just sign right here, Dad," he urged softly. "I have a notary at my office waiting. We can get a freeze on your assets by noon, and I'll move your liquid funds into a safe harbor account under my firm's umbrella. I promise I won't let them take what you've worked for. I want to pause right here and ask you, what would you have done in my place if your own flesh and blood sat in your kitchen, looked you in the eye, and tried to manipulate you into signing away your life's work? Using a forged government document, would you have confronted them right then and there? Would you have flipped the table and thrown them out of your house? Let me know." It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to reach across the table and grab him by the collar. My heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a mixture of profound heartbreak and rising white-hot anger. But I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I knew that if I confronted him now, he would snatch the paper away, claim it was a misunderstanding, destroy the evidence, and immediately start covering his tracks. Worse, he might try to isolate Elaine from me, convincing her that I was paranoid and losing my mind. I had to let him believe he was outsmarting me. I let my shoulders slump. I pushed my glasses down my nose, adopting the posture of a tired, frightened old man. I let my hands tremble just a little as I touched the edge of the forged document. "David, this is so overwhelming," I whispered, keeping my eyes locked on the table. I don't even know how to process this. My benefits frozen. The government taking our accounts? What about your mother's medical bills? I know, Dad, David said, his voice dropping into a comforting register. I know it's scary, but that's why I'm here. You don't have to understand the mechanics of it. Just trust me. Sign the designation, and I'll handle the federal investigators. I need a day, I said, rubbing my temples. I need to talk to your mother. I need to get my reading glasses, my real ones, to read through the fine print. Let's do this on Friday. I'll come to your office so we can go to the bank together and we'll sign everything officially. Just give me until Friday to get my head straight. David hesitated. I could see the impatience twitching in his cheek. He wanted the signature right then. But he also knew that pushing too hard might trigger my suspicion. He smiled a thin, tight expression and nodded. Okay, Dad, Friday morning. But don't log into your bank accounts and don't call the Social Security office. If you trigger an automated fraud alert on their end, they might lock down the accounts before I can secure the funds. Let me handle the communication. I won't call anyone, I promised, my voice entirely steady. As soon as David's car pulled out of my driveway, I took the forged letter into my home office, closed the door, and locked it. I sat down at my computer, a custom-built machine with heavily encrypted drives that I had maintained since my retirement. I didn't call the Social Security Administration on the phone. I didn't need to. I logged into my secure online portal using the two-factor authentication I had set up years ago. My dashboard loaded instantly, status active, no alerts, no freezes, no federal investigations. My next deposit was scheduled precisely as it always was. The lie was confirmed. Now I needed to know the depth of the rot. I opened a command terminal and ran a voice lookup on the domain name I had seen on the printed email. Just as I suspected, the domain, Chloe Holdings, LLC.net, was registered to a shell company in Delaware, but the administrative contact traced directly back to an IP address located in Chicago, specifically the geographic location of David and Chloe's house. But why were they doing this? Why go through the incredible risk of forging federal documents? I pulled my comprehensive credit reports from all three major bureaus, something I routinely did every 6 months anyway. As my eyes scanned the lines of data, the breath caught in my throat. There, listed under recent activity, were 3 hard credit inquiries initiated in the last 48 hours. They were applications for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, totaling $250,000, drawn against the equity of the Traverse City cabin. Because the cabin was solely in my name and Elaine's name, David couldn't legally leverage it, unless, of course, he had a legally binding durable power of attorney granting him total financial control over my estate. He wasn't just trying to protect my money. He was trying to drain the equity out of the cabin I built with my father to cover his own debts, using a manufactured crisis to panic me into giving him the keys to the vault. I needed professional eyes on this to ensure I wasn't missing a legal loophole. I picked up my phone and called Marcus, a retired estate attorney and one of my oldest friends. We had played poker together on Thursday nights for 20 years. I didn't give him the details over the phone. I just asked if I could come over to his home office immediately. When I sat in Marcus's leather armchair and laid the forged Treasury document and the credit report on his desk, I watched his face transition from confusion to professional horror. "Arthur," Marcus said quietly, running a hand over his face, "this isn't just a manipulation tactic. Forging a federal seal to compel a signature on a financial instrument is federal wire fraud. It's elder financial abuse. If he uses the power of attorney he's trying to get you to sign to execute that HELOC, he's committing bank fraud. Does he understand the fire he's playing with?" "He thinks I'm a dinosaur, Marcus," I replied, staring at the paperwork. "He thinks I don't understand how the internet works. He thinks I'm just a scared old man whose brain is going soft." Marcus leaned forward. "We can stop the HELOC right now. We put a freeze on your credit, but Arthur, if we just block it, he'll know you caught him. He might try something else. He might go after Elaine while you're out of the house." "What do you want to do?" "I want to know everything," I said, my voice hardening. "Before I drop the hammer, I need to know exactly how deep this goes. I need to know if my son is the architect of this, or if he's drowning and desperate." That night, after Elaine had gone to sleep, I sat in the dark of my office. I remembered something David had overlooked. 2 years ago, when he first started his wealth management firm, he had asked me to help him set up a secure cloud storage drive for his family photos and personal documents, complaining that the commercial options were too confusing. I had configured a private server space for him and on a secure host gave him the admin rights and told him how to use it. What he had forgotten was that as the network creator, I still had a master access log that allowed me to view the directory structure even if I rarely ever used it. I didn't want to violate my son's privacy, but my son was actively trying to steal my home. The rules of engagement had changed. I accessed the cloud drive. I bypassed his weak password, which was still his childhood dog's name, followed by his birth year, and opened the file directory. I bypassed the folders labeled Vacations and Tax Returns. I scrolled down until I found a folder created 3 weeks ago simply titled Estate Transition. My hand hovered over the mouse. I clicked it open. Inside were several documents. One was a sprawling Excel spreadsheet detailing his and Chloe's personal finances. They were practically bankrupt. They had over-leveraged themselves on their massive house, maxed out their credit lines to maintain their luxury lifestyle, and Chloe's real estate business had taken a massive hit due to rising interest rates. They were drowning in over $80,000 of high-interest, unsecured debt. But it was the next document that broke my heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. It was a PDF export of text message logs between David and Chloe saved for their records. I opened it and read the words my son had typed. Chloe, did you get him to sign the POA yet? The bank needs it by Friday or the HELOC rate lock expires. David, I'm going over there tomorrow with the fake SSA letter. It'll scare him into it. He's been losing his edge anyway. He forgot his keys twice last week. Chloe, what about your mom? Will she fight it? David, mom is in too much pain to care. Once I have the POA, we pull the equity from the cabin to clear our debts. Next year we use the medical directive to move them both into the assisted living center on Oak Ridge. Then we can liquidate the primary house and the cabin outright. It's inheritance anyway, Chloe. We're just taking it early so we don't go under. Chloe, he's too blind to notice and she's too weak to fight. Just get it done. David, I will. He trusts me completely. I sat in the glow of the monitor, feeling tears spilling over my eyelashes and running down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away. I just sat there and wept. I wept for the little boy who used to sit on my shoulders at the county fair. I wept for the teenager who helped me change the oil in my truck. I wept for the illusion of the family I thought I had. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing our dignity. They were planning to force Elaine and me out of our home, lock us in a facility, and sell off the legacy I had built, all to pay for their leased Mercedes and their designer clothes. They viewed my aging as a weapon they could use against me. They mistook my quiet nature for weakness. They mistook Elaine's illness for helplessness. I stood up from the computer. I walked quietly out to the garage, turning on the dim overhead light. I walked over to my workbench. Hanging on the pegboard was the old wooden mallet I had used to tap the floorboards into place at the Traverse City cabin. I reached out and ran my thumb over the worn handle, feeling the history etched into the wood. The grief began to recede, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. My son had made his choice. He had decided that my life was over and his was the only one that mattered. I was about to teach him a very harsh lesson about what happens when you try to outsmart a man who has spent 40 years hunting down malicious actors. I needed proof that he couldn't deny. I couldn't just confront him with the text messages. He would claim they were taken out of context or that his phone was hacked. I had to let him walk directly into a trap of his own making, in front of witnesses where he would legally and financially hang himself. The next morning I called David. I made my voice sound raspy and exhausted. David, it's Dad, I said, pausing to let out a long sigh. I've been up all night worrying about this government thing. You're right. I can't handle this. The stress is making my chest hurt. I want to sign the papers. Dad, that's the smart move, David replied, his voice instantly brightening with barely concealed triumph. It's going to be okay. I've got you. Let's meet on Friday morning. We can do it at my bank in the financial district. I'll have the manager and a notary there. No, I said softly, injecting just the right amount of stubborn old man pride into my voice. If I'm signing over control of my life, I want to do it at a proper law office. I called Marcus. You remember my friend Marcus. He said we can use his conference room. It makes me feel safer doing it somewhere familiar. David hesitated. Dad, we don't need a lawyer for this. It's just standard paperwork. It's Marcus, or I don't sign anything. David, I insisted, letting my voice crack slightly. Please just humor me. I'm scared. Okay, Dad. David relented quickly, not wanting to lose the fish on the hook. Friday at 10:00 a.m. at Marcus's office. I'll bring all the paperwork. With the meeting set, Marcus and I went to work. We didn't have much time, but Marcus was a maestro of estate law. Over the next 48 hours, we executed a rapid ironclad legal maneuver. We transferred the title of the Grand Rapids house and the deed to the Traverse City cabin out of my name and into an irrevocable family protection trust. By doing this, the properties ceased to be my personal assets. They were legally walled off. Even if David managed to get a legitimate power of attorney, it would be utterly useless against the trust. The trust was structured so that neither property could be sold, borrowed against, or altered without the dual consent of the appointed trustees, which were Marcus and a fiercely loyal fiduciary from my old hospital system. Next, I contacted all 3 credit bureaus and locked down my and Elaine's credit with a permanent fraud alert. Any attempt to open a line of credit would immediately flag the applicant for identity theft. Finally, I went to my own bank and set up a heavily monitored honeypot account. I moved exactly $500 into it, making it look like a newly established clearing account. I instructed the branch manager, whom I had known for 15 years, to flag any external transfer attempts from David's brokerage firm. Imagine sitting in the quiet of your home, putting these pieces together, knowing that at the end of the week you are going to look into the eyes of your own child and pull the rug out from under their entire life. Could you keep your hands from shaking? When Friday morning arrived, the sky over Grand Rapids was a clear, brilliant blue. I kissed Elaine on the forehead, told her I was going to run some errands with Marcus, and drove downtown. Marcus's law office was located in a beautifully restored brick building with heavy mahogany doors and thick, sound-muffling carpets. When I walked into the main conference room, David and Chloe were already there. They were dressed immaculately. David wore a tailored navy suit, and Chloe wore a sharp designer dress, holding her expensive handbag in her lap. They looked like predators waiting for the final kill. Marcus sat at the head of the long oak table, his expression completely unreadable. I took the seat directly across from my son. "Dad," David said, reaching across the table to squeeze my arm. "You look tired. I'm so glad we're doing this. You're going to feel so much better when this is off your shoulders." "I hope so, David," I said quietly. Chloe offered me a brilliant artificial smile. "We're going to take such good care of you and Elaine, Arthur. You won't have to worry about a thing." David unzipped his leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of documents across the polished wood. On top was the forged Treasury letter. Beneath it was the durable power of attorney, giving David complete, unmitigated control over all my finances, real estate, and medical decisions. And beneath that, hidden subtly in the stack, was the signature page for the $250,000 HELOC application. "Okay, Dad," David said, handing me a heavy silver pen. "Just sign where the yellow tabs are. Marcus can notarize them, and then I'll get this straight to the federal investigators to stop the freeze on your Social Security." I didn't take the pen. I looked at the papers. Then I looked up at my son. "David, before I sign this, I just want to make absolutely sure," I said, keeping my voice mild and confused. "The government is really freezing my money. It's really hackers." "Yes, Dad," David said, his tone adopting that patient, patronizing rhythm. "It's a massive breach. The Treasury Department sent that letter directly to my office because I'm on your emergency file. If you don't sign today, they'll lock your accounts by Monday, and you and Mom will have nothing." I nodded slowly. I let the silence stretch out in the room. The only sound was the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Then my posture changed. I sat up straight. I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose. The tired, frightened old man vanished, replaced by the Senior Network Security Auditor, who had spent 4 decades dismantling liars. I reached into my own briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I opened it and took out a single piece of paper. I slid it across the table until it rested directly on top of David's forged Treasury letter. It was the Hoy's registry printout, highlighting the Chloe Holdings LLC.net domain alongside the X-originating IP log from the bottom of his printed email. "That's fascinating, David," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Because according to the server routing data on the letter you gave me, the United States Department of the Treasury is apparently running their federal fraud investigations out of your guest bedroom in Chicago." David stared at the paper. The practiced confident smile evaporated from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending shock. He blinked, looking from the paper to me, his brain struggling to process what was happening. "Dad, what is this?" he stammered. "It's a digital footprint, David," I replied coldly. "Something you would know about if you hadn't been so arrogant as to think I was too stupid to read the metadata on a printed email. You forged a federal document, you spoofed the email header, and you used your wife's LLC domain to do it." Chloe's posture went rigid. "Arthur, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is absurd." I ignored her. I pulled out the next document and slid it across the table. It was the credit report showing the hard inquiries. "You didn't forge this to save me from hackers, David. You forged this to panic me into signing a power of attorney so you could execute this $250,000 HELOC against the Traverse City cabin, a cabin you thought was easy pickings because you assumed I was losing my mind and your mother was too sick to fight." David's face drained of color. He looked physically ill. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but the words died in his throat. "Dad, I can explain." He whispered, his hands dropping off the table into his lap. The market turned on us. We're in debt. We were going to pay you back. I swear to God, we were going to pay it back. I was just trying to manage the situation without stressing you out. By planning to force your mother and me into an assisted living facility, I asked. I pulled out the final stack of papers, the printed text logs, from his secure cloud drive. I slid them perfectly across the wood until they stopped inches from Chloe's designer handbag. "I built your network, David," I said softly, the heartbreak finally leaking into my voice. "Did you really think I didn't know how to read the access logs? He's too blind to notice and she's too weak to fight. That's what you think of us. We aren't your parents anymore. We're just an inheritance you decided you were tired of waiting for." Chloe stood up her chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "This is illegal. You hacked his private drive. You can't use this." Marcus, who had been sitting silently the entire time, finally leaned forward and folded his hands on the table. "Actually, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority, "Arthur is the registered administrator of that server. It is legally his property. But that's the least of your concerns right now. Because 30 minutes ago I submitted these documents to the fraud division of your husband's brokerage firm, as well as the compliance board of the State Real Estate Commission." David looked like he had been struck by lightning. You sent this to my firm?" "I did," Marcus confirmed. "Furthermore, as of yesterday, Arthur's primary residence and the Traverse City property were transferred into an irrevocable trust. The properties you are attempting to leverage no longer belong to Arthur Mitchell. They belong to a legal entity that you cannot touch, even if you had a legitimate power of attorney. What you hold in your hands, David, is undeniable evidence of attempted wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and bank fraud. The power reversal in the room was absolute. They had walked in, believing they were the masters of the universe, holding the fate of a confused old man in their hands. Now they were staring down the barrel of total financial and legal ruin. David began to hyperventilate. He reached out his hands, shaking violently, trying to grab the papers back. "Dad, please," he begged, tears welling up in his eyes, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "Please, you can't do this. They'll pull my broker's license. They'll fire me. I'll go to jail. Dad, please, I'm your son. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at the boy I had taught to fish. I looked at the man who had planned to throw me into a facility and steal my home. The hardest thing I have ever had to do in my entire life was to look him in the eye and feel absolutely nothing but pity. "You aren't sorry you did it, David," I said quietly, gathering my briefcase. "You're just terrified that the old man caught you." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "Here are the terms," Marcus said, taking over the conversation smoothly. "Arthur is not filing criminal charges today, but you will immediately sign a binding legal forfeiture waiving any and all future claims to Arthur and Elaine's estate. You will never ask them for money again. You will never attempt to manage their affairs again. If you contact them asking for a loan, or if you ever try to pull a stunt like this again, this entire file goes directly to the FBI field office in Detroit. Are we entirely clear?" David, sobbing quietly into his hands, nodded his head. Chloe wouldn't even look at me. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the conference room without saying a single word. The aftermath of that day was not like a movie. There was no triumphant music. There was only the quiet, heavy reality of a shattered family. When David's firm reviewed the evidence of the fraudulent HELOC attempt, they didn't just fire him, they stripped him of his broker's license. He was permanently banned from the financial industry. Without his income, their house of cards collapsed entirely. Within 3 months, their massive house went into foreclosure. The stress of the financial ruin tore their marriage apart, and Chloe filed for divorce, attempting to distance herself from the fallout, though her own real estate LLC remained under investigation for its role in the email spoofing. Telling Elaine what our son had tried to do was the most painful conversation of my life. We sat on the couch and I held her hands while she cried. It hurt deeply. It still hurts. There is an empty chair at our table during the holidays. Now a silence where our son used to be. But as the months passed, the pain began to transform into something else. It transformed into peace. We didn't have to look over our shoulders. We didn't have to wonder if the people smiling at us were secretly measuring the walls for an estate sale. Last week, Elaine and I drove up to the Traverse City cabin. Her arthritis was acting up, so I helped her down to the wooden dock I had built all those years ago. We sat in 2 heavy Adirondack chairs, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun sink below the tree line, casting a golden light across the ripples of the lake. The cabin still smelled like cedar and wood smoke. The fieldstone fireplace still stood strong. I looked out at the water and I realized something profound. Aging does not mean you have to become a victim. The world will often try to tell you that getting older means getting weaker, that you should surrender your independence and let younger, faster hands take the wheel. But experience is a weapon. The patience you learn over decades of living, the ability to see the truth beneath the lies. The quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are, those are things no one can steal from you unless you let them. I loved my son, but I love my wife and the life we built more. I refuse to let his greed dismantle our dignity. Sometimes the hardest lesson you learn in life is that not everyone who shares your blood shares your heart. And sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to let the people who mistake your kindness for weakness find out exactly how strong you really are. I want to thank you for listening to my story today. I'll leave you with one final question. Has someone you trusted implicitly ever forced you to draw a line in the sand that you could never uncross? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe and return for more stories. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you feel small in the house you built.